Elaina O'Shea,
Patrick, how are you?
great, great to hear from you, and welcome to the Talking Talent podcast.
Delighted to be here.
So, how are you?
I'm good. I am feeling fantastic, and I think it's such a great thing that the weather has been so good for this quarantine because there's no better place to be at the moment than Sweden. Um, you can go anywhere. There's no feeling of a lockdown whatsoever. So mentally, my mental health is also fantastic as well as my physical health at the moment. Never been better.
Yeah, I have to agree. It's been. Can you imagine living in a society which is literally every other society on earth, where people have been locked up in their house, told who they can meet, how far they can go, what times they can leave their house, and can you imagine how restrictive and stifling that must be to the mental health and physical health?
Yeah, the long-term damage with regards to social anxiety. We're going to see that going forward, the long-term effects of this lockdown. It's definitely not healthy.
What do you see the problems being, over the next year as a result of this?
I think that depression is going to be on the rise. I think social anxiety is going to be on the rise. Um, People that usually were struggling were able to reach out to their family and friends, get a hug. And any of those people that live alone, they are completely alone. And I know that we have technology, but there's nothing like human touch when you're struggling. And I think we're going to see, sadly, some negative effects of that.
Yeah, I think just being in the presence of people who you trust, just being in their aura, being around them, having a dinner with them, sitting down for a few beers or a pizza or whatever your thing is, with people who are within your tribe, has such a healing and sort of caring impact.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, honestly, since this whole thing began, I've still been able to do a lot of social distancing walks with my friends. And when am on my way home, I feel so much energy. I feel like their energy has filled me up, if that makes
Yeah.
sense.
So, what about your own health? I mean, how has this impacted it or not? Has it been better for it or worse, or what's been happening with you?
I would say this has probably been strangely a blessing in disguise because for the first time in 10 years, I've really had a chance to focus completely on my health. And it's such a complicated thing when you have something such as a head trauma. Um, there's such a balancing act to try not to get seizures. There's so many factors that come into play, and now I've had the time to perform that balancing act. Got my sleep right, got my diet right, fitness levels, hydration, um, eliminated all of my triggers, found out triggers that I wasn't even aware of because honestly, before this, I was always a little bit of a workaholic. And so I never really had the time to really stop and listen to my body. And I've actually been seizure free for 50 days now, which is the first time that I've been seizure free for so long since
Wow.
I've had my head trauma.
Can you, if you don't mind, do you mind sharing sort of the history of what happened to you and, how you've worked through it as a woman who's always been at the forefront of business and how it's, just tell us your story.
Yeah, well, I was in London and I was in the middle of my master's exams, my final exams for my first master's, and I was unfortunately mugged, which happens to a lot of people in London, especially late at night. Um, I was innocent at the time. I wasn't really looking around expecting to be attacked, so maybe I was a little bit. Well, you always look back and you blame yourself, but I should have been more aware of my surroundings, and all of a sudden I was on the ground and my skull had smashed between the curb and the footpath and the road. So it was quite a blunt trauma on the back of my head. Um, and concussion, etc. But the next day I started to feel the effects almost instantaneously. I started to jerk in my left side of my face and my left hand, and sometimes even my leg. Um, and at the time, I I didn't go and seek any medical help for it. I just brushed it off as stress and, maybe a bad hangover or something. And I went back and I finished my exams. And while I was doing my final exams, luckily I'm right-handed, but my left hand was jerking and cramping the entire time. And I just felt like I was pushing through a body that wasn't working anymore. And I just pushed and pushed and I ignored it for so long. Um, and then eventually I moved to London after my exams, and I was, working really hard because I'd gone into the broadcasting industry. So I was working in BBC at the time, and I was getting up at 4 a.m. to start work, work the whole night, and then maybe 2 or 3 hours sleep, get up again 4 a.m. And it just got to be too much. And I was out one night. I was doing modeling as well at the time. I'd been modeling since the age of 16. So I had a lot of events that were quite late. And it was just after one event that just went on far too late. I went to bed maybe 6 a.m. and I got up at 8. And I started to walk towards the bedroom door. And that was when I had my first grand mal seizure. And I hit my head off the locker beside my bed. And I woke up. And I felt like half my face had been torn off. That's how it felt. I was really scared. So
And how long was that after the attack?
that was, gosh, it must have been, I'd been working hard for about 6 months maybe. And I'd been having work the entire time. And I lived with my sister, luckily, at the time. And she had been saying to me that I needed to go and see someone because it wasn't normal. She would see me seizing in my sleep. And she was worried. And I just thought, well, I went to school with this girl who had Bell's palsy from stress, and then it went away. And maybe I've just got a bit of that in the face and the arm. I didn't really think about it. I was so focused on my career at the time and networking and so on until I didn't stop until I literally had to stop. And there was a big lump in my head. And when I got up, and I had my hand hovering over my face because I'd ripped my jaw on my way down, and I had carpet burns all over the left side of my body where I fell. And I just walked into my sister, who was getting ready to leave for work at the time. And I said to her, am I okay? And she took one look at me and panicked. And so then the ambulance, luckily, there's always a hospital nearby in London. The ambulance picked me up, and I would just remember vomiting blood the whole way in the ambulance. And now that it's been 10 years, I know that whenever I vomit blood, it means that I've been out cold for a long time, or I've been seizing for a long time, because that means that I've been swallowing or choking on the blood from my tongue or my gums.
Seriously?
Yeah, so the more blood I have in my stomach, the longer the seizure has been. That's kind of my telltale sign. So I had to pull out of the BBC job at the time, and I had to go to a doctor and say, all right, okay, I think there's something wrong with me. And it was a lot for me to admit that because I'd never been in a hospital before. I had a very healthy childhood. I was very lucky. And she said, right, well, you could die getting run over crossing the road if you have a seizure. And I was like, well, I definitely don't have epilepsy. It's probably just stress. And I went to see a neurologist, and they panicked. They got a MRI truck down from Liverpool that same day, drove all the way down to see me.
Wow.
Hours later, I was in the MRI, and they said I should have come a lot sooner because of the concussion, and I had probably done a lot of unnecessary damage by not coming forward to the hospital after the concussion. Because head traumas are quite complicated. You get a lot of swelling and so on. But I didn't know anything about epilepsy at the time, but they told me I probably have it. And they gave me some medication, and I put it in a drawer, and I found my next job I did an internship at CNN at the time. And I just had my medication sitting in my drawer, and I said, I am fine. There's nothing wrong with me. And it just continued to get worse and just crash and crash. And I just didn't have time for it. I was just, broadcasting career, modeling. And then I was also running a lot at the time. And anyway, my seizures got so bad that I had to stop. I couldn't even walk for 2 weeks, and my sister had to take care of me. She had to hold me up on the toilet while I was peeing, and I was having seizures then, and I was, falling in the middle of the street. I couldn't go outside without her holding me. So I had to just stop everything, and I reluctantly said, okay. I went back to the neurologist. I said, okay, I need to start taking these medications. I think I do have epilepsy. And that was very hard for me to admit. And I was in such denial. I was just looking for my next job. But in the back of my head, I felt, without doing really any research, I felt, oh no, my brain is not going to work the same. And my body's never going to work the same.
Yeah.
So I stopped modeling and I stopped running. And for a long time, I didn't run, or I only ran very short distance. I stopped doing marathons that I've been doing since I was 16. And I had this idea that I was going to do a PhD in the next year, and I was enrolled and I dropped that. And I just thought, well, my brain's not working, my body's not working, there's something wrong with me, and I just have to deal with it. And so I sort of gave up on myself, or I became afraid. And I think that's really common with people that are diagnosed with some kind of brain injury. They just assume, okay, the whole is going to suffer from this, and now I'm lacking something. So I started working behind the scenes. I found a great job working in post-production, which it was like Top Gear. It was all the major British TV shows at the time. We did all their post-production. It was a really large company. And to prove myself, I wanted to be a technician at the time. There were no technicians. And they sort of laughed at me and said, oh no, you wouldn't be able to handle this. It's horrible hours. You have to lift heavy things all the time. There's so much, you have to know computer science and engineering. There's so many wires and buttons and tricks. And I said, well, okay, so I'll take a job, as a production assistant and client services. And then I will do this in my after hours. And for about a year, I did after hours, like about at least 3 hours a day after my shift. I would go and I would shadow them until they couldn't refuse me a spot anymore. And I started doing night shifts. And night shifts were a blessing and a curse because I could hide my seizures.
Could you? Is that where your mindset was? I want to hide this from people?
Yeah. I never came forward about it. And I think I worked twice as hard as everyone else because I really had a lot to prove, and I was going home to Ireland, and my family would be, all my relatives would be like, oh, Elaina, she works in television over in London. And there was such a shame about if I was to drop out. So I just had to keep going. I had to make my family proud. And, television in London, she worked in the BBC, CNN, you know how they are in Ireland. Town mentality.
And tell me this. So when you were going through all of this, your goal was just, you were more career orientated?
Oh, absolutely.
Than health orientated. You were just like, I'll get through it. I'll make it happen. I'll see what happens down the line once I get this career fixed.
Yeah, that was it. I had to make it to the top. I had to prove myself, and then I would deal with the epilepsy. Yeah. And I kept pushing it forward. I would see a neurologist every 3 to 6 months, but I was always in ambulances. I mean, there was one time that I was on my lunch break from work when I started doing day role again in the TV industry. And I went, I felt funny. So I went into a bank and had a seizure on the bank floor and ended up getting picked up by an ambulance.
Wow.
And I begged them. I said, please drop me at work. They can't know about this. Please just drop me back at the office. And I went into the office and I was having more seizures. So I said to my friend, look, I need you to hide me in the edit suite for half an hour while I have a seizure.
Seriously?
Yeah. Yeah.
That's crazy. But I know that you have a great, wonderful sort of matriarchal grandmother.
Yeah.
Such a powerful, strong Irish woman, like a real leader of the family. Did she know anything about this?
She did. And she was such a strong woman, and her background was just push on with it, get up, and just keep going. And your health is your wealth. That was her other saying.
Yeah.
But more was just get on with it. You're a woman, opportunities don't come along, just go for them. And maybe I read between the lines, and I thought, right, health is your wealth, but forget about that, wealth first, then health.
Uh,
Um, and so, yeah, so it just came and went, and it ruined a lot of my jobs, because sometimes I would have a seizure that was so bad I would be basically disabled for 2 weeks, where people would have to spoon feed me, and I couldn't even open my mouth because my jaw was so torn. And I would have to either call in sick, or I would have to leave the job, depending on how sick I was at the time.
I
So I
think,
jumped from company to company a lot.
yeah, I think this is one of my strengths actually, is the fact that I've got a little bit of a selfish streak in that way. Whereas if I will be more transparent about things like that and go, you know what, I'm going to do a good job for you, but I'm also got this other thing, and it may impact it. And if you can't deal with that, then obviously we're not meant to be.
You know,
And
that's true bravery. That's the definition of bravery.
no,
And I thought,
I think it's the definition of actually common sense.
yeah.
But it seems like brave whenever you're the person who's hiding something. So I'm very much Lena about just
Mhm.
I am enough. I've got this thing that I always think I am
Yeah.
enough. Whatever I put forward, that's enough. And if it's not enough for you, then it means we're not supposed to be on this sort of journey together. And thanks very much for crossing my path. See you later. And I always think there's no point in hiding stuff from people, because life is tough enough. And again, I'm looking at it from my own sort of selfish perspective. Like, my life is tough enough. Everyone's life is tough enough. And if I start sort of hiding things, then it only makes it more tough for me. And I always think when you hide one thing, then you have to do another thing to hide it, and then you end up having to do like 10 things to hide, to hide, to hide, to hide. And all it does is it just creates more pain for me myself. So I'm more of like, put the cards on the table and say, this is who I am, and if it's not enough for you, then that's okay, but I'm enough for me.
Wise words.
You know,
Absolutely.
and it's, of course, I'm saying this as a 41-year-old man. It's different when you're a 21-year-old Irish girl living in London, trying to sort of rock the world, and everyone's so proud of you, everyone's so dependent. So I'm saying that as well, but I'm sort of saying that to people who are listening. I don't
Yeah.
care, because there's people who are 21-year-old girls in London, but there's also 61-year-old men who are hiding things. And I always
Yeah.
say, just be transparent. If they don't like it, then that's on them. But don't change yourself for anyone.
Absolutely. And shame will eat you up. Shame is a disease. It's an internal.
Oh, shame is nasty.
Yeah.
It's nasty. I think two things about shame. I think it's the low. Do you ever see these things like people talk about being fat shamed or thin shamed or
Mhm.
whatever? You should never say that anyone's trying to shame you, because that's the most horrible frequency you can be on, is the frequency of shame. Shame is
Mm.
nasty. And because it's so nasty, in a way, it's a great motivator. So if you look at a lot of people who've become successful or been able to achieve anything in life, it's because they've been so ashamed of their circumstances that they've been able to climb themselves up the ladder. And
Wow.
I know for me, when I look back, I was actually pondering on this just a few months ago about the power of shame, because it's such a bad negative thing. It's such a great motivator. And I actually look back at my life,
Wow.
because that was my motivator. I had such a shame about sort of the level of poverty that we had, and I'm not saying, and the good thing about our poverty was that everyone was in the same boat, so we were all poor together, but it didn't make it better for me. I still felt ashamed about it, and it was why I got motivated to sort of want to do more for myself, and it's why I set this sort of life structure that I went off on.
That's amazing. And it's so true. I never thought of it that way. That's so amazing to frame it like that. And maybe in some strange way, the shame around my hidden broken brain was that I felt I had more to prove than anyone else, because I was so ashamed to let anyone know that I was not okay or that I was broken.
Yeah, but I
I
have
was
to say this
so
about you. I remember meeting you on a cold Monday night in the winter in Stockholm, and I was with my wife, and this bright light of a lady with bright sparkling eyes and a big massive smile came walking up to us and introduced herself, and it was you. And we've been great friends ever since, and it's one of the great blessings. My friendship with you is one of my great blessings of being in the city of Stockholm.
Oh, likewise.
I really am proud of you, and this is before I didn't even. I've only found out about your seizures in the past year as well, but I've seen you working, I've seen you networking, I've seen you building and developing and putting on events in the city of Stockholm, and you've been fantastic, Elaina. You've really made me proud that this is an Irish girl working abroad as an immigrant, doing her best, but really shining bright. And I have to say that, like, you are a real talent, and it's keep going, whatever you're doing, keep going, but health first, then wealth.
Thank you. That's so nice of you. Some people ask me why I'm such a good schmoozer, and a lot of it was obviously working in London in the TV industry. Your next job was always about who you knew. So everywhere you went, you were trying to pick up your next job. And so you were just connecting and connecting desperately in the hopes that when one contract or one film contract or TV series ends, that you know someone who's going to give you a call and say good things about you, and then all of a sudden you have another job. And same, you give it back to them. It's a real
Yeah.
circle, and in that way, the industry is so hard to crack into.
I'm recording this podcast through Anchor. And if you're considering doing a podcast and you haven't heard about Anchor, then let me tell you, it's the easiest way to do a podcast. So let me explain. It's free. There are creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer. Anchor will distribute the podcast for you, so it can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcast, and many other platforms. You can make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. And it's everything that you need to make a podcast all in one place. Definitely check it out. Download the app now from the store.
Because people give jobs to their friends.
And how,
Absolutely.
and how did you crack into it? What's your story there professionally?
Well, if you want to go really deep, my grandmother was in politics.
Yeah.
Uh, she started out at 16 as a nurse in Scotland and then in London, and she was working with World War II veterans. And her brother went to become an ambassador. So her brother was one of the first ambassadors at the time. This was way, way back. And he was the first ambassador to New York. And then later he became the ambassador of Ireland to Brussels. And my grandmother worked as well. She left nursing and she went into politics in Northern Ireland. And so he lived in Brussels at the time, and she was sort of his base in Ireland. So they would have all sorts of celebrities over at my grandmother's house. And it would be huge, big dinner parties for him and her, and these big networking events and this big dining room table. And they had another dining room, kind of a ballroom. So there were always very interesting people over at my grandmother's house. And as a child, I was so lucky to be able to witness this and how they schmoozed and how they charmed people and how they worked the room. From a very, very young age, I was witnessing, and also my mother's cousin was Phil Lynott from Thin Lizzy Band. And he was always arriving in a limo to
Wow.
my grandmother's house. And I just remember watching her as a child and just seeing, right, okay, power is in connections with people. And that's what I learned from a very young age. You've got to connect with as many people as you can. And there's power in that we're social creatures. And so when I got to London, the first thing I did was use that philosophy of just connect, find your power through people.
Yeah.
Just being able to work a room, I just mimicked what my grandmother used to do. I used to watch her carefully. She was such an idol. And the body language, everything, the smile.
Yeah. She was a powerhouse, wasn't she? Really?
Yeah.
And the fact that you had a direct literally a direct line to her, and were able to observe someone like that it's fascinating for me. Like, I never had anyone like that where I grew up. I never had anyone I could look up to, or I never had a teacher who patted me on the back or anything. So everything I've done, I've had to do it, like you say, just by watching others, by reading, by learning, by basically trying to be a nice, good human being. And I always think the best approach that I can have to anyone is just to be kind to them. If I don't have any other skills that I can use, or I have no other inspirations or people that I can look to, kindness is probably the way forward. And when I think about the person you are, and I've seen you both personally and professionally around, you have kindness at your very core as well. You're very much about you're a giver, and the fact that you were able to merge that with the skill set that you were able to observe from your grandmother and the sort of tidbits that she would teach you as you grew up, you've made her so proud, Elaina.
Oh, wow. Wow, yeah. Well, I think that the most important thing that you can do is be kind and give to others. I think that there's no meaning in your life if you're taking from others. It's all about giving. That's where you get meaning.
I
And
love that.
I used to say it to my sisters a lot that if you find yourself feeling meaningless, which sometimes when you're young you do, just remember that the most important meaning that a human being can have is where their place is in their community and how they affect others. And that's what the meaning is. It's through others and it's through how you make their lives better.
Yeah.
That's the purpose.
Can
Even in the
I
small village.
can I ask you about then the current state of the world with all this madness that's going on around us at the moment? What do you feel is missing within, if you zoom in at a sort of individual level of these people who are, you know, causing havoc in their own communities at the moment? What is missing, or what does our society need more of to sort of get people to have that sense of meaning?
Good question. Um, with regards to the Black Lives Matter situation, that's just heartbreaking because I think that one of the major problems was ignorance. And if you allow ignorance, then that's the source of all evil. And now that people have um, access to basically every sort of social media platform in the world, there's so much exposure. So they're flushing out the ignorance, and then anyone who I don't know who is ignorant for whatever reason, um, they just can't get away with it anymore. People are filming everywhere.
Yeah,
Even racist comments I see on my Instagram feed sometimes. There's people making racist comments and people are filming them, and then you hear a week later in the news that person lost their job. It's like,
yeah,
oh, and you hope for them that they will change, that ignorance will then end, and that person will go and get educated, have some empathy, and then become a better person. You,
yeah.
um,
Because it is such a unique time in history. Actually, we're living at a time now where we're living in the information age. So in the information age, ignorance is a choice.
Absolutely.
All the information that you want is actually in your pocket right now. All you have to do is take it out, and all the reports, all the autobiographies, all the sayings, all the quotes that you need from all the wisest people that have ever lived are at your disposal. The most up to date, current, real time information is at your disposal. It's just a matter of what are you going to do when you take your phone out of your pocket? Are you going to search for kittens rolling down hills, or are you going to search for the thing that will make you a bigger, better, stronger, more kind, compassionate, empathetic human being?
Mm. I mean, we all have capacity for ignorance and evil, every single one of us.
Yeah.
I
And that's
think.
such an important statement, because so many, I think one of the problems in our society now is that everyone thinks that they're right, but the others are wrong, and therefore the others are bad. But everyone has got the capacity to be everything from Mother Teresa to Paul Potts. It's in all of us, just depends on where we put our energy and what we want to focus on. You know, Paul Potts, I think in my lifetime, was actually trying to set his world back to year zero by killing everyone who could read, write, or be an intellectual. And so he basically killed everyone who wasn't a peasant farmer or a young kid, so that he could start his world from year zero and build it up in his way. And people bought into his vision very quickly, which is the shocking part, is that people can think, okay, this guy's a leader and he seems to have a vision, and it's better than whatever else is out there. So yeah, let's go along with this and create this havoc and this evil within our own society, within our own families.
Yeah.
And at the other side, then you've got people who are trying to do great good. But depending on where you stand, you might think that the person who's trying to do good is evil, and the person who's trying to do evil is good. So
Yeah.
I think we have to be so careful about what we buy into and what we're getting. I mean, the information that we get in now is so filtered through lenses based on our previous clicks and our previous articles that we've read and all. And it's one of the reasons why I actually like, whenever I go home, particularly to Ireland, I like to grab a newspaper, because each page you turn is not filtered directly for me. It's the news that has happened in the past few days. It's the topics of the that's currently important to our world. Whereas I find that whenever I go online to disseminate information, it's too often the same info from the same sources that I'm getting, just based on algorithms which are being fed to me.
God, that's so interesting. I need to start doing that.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
So and so even at that, like, even the things where I think I'm right, I'm like, am I right on this, or am I actually on the wrong side of this? Because I'm thinking, and all the people around me are thinking that this thing is right. But are we all wrong? Are we all being led down the Paul Potts route, or are we all right and it's the other people who are wrong? But I'm definitely questioning myself as well and going, I've been wrong a lot. Like, this is the thing that fascinates me, Elaina. Everything that I like, almost all the things I believed in, even just 10 years ago, I probably think the opposite now. And maybe it's because I've developed into a better person. Maybe I've been manipulated into thinking new information. Maybe it's part of the society that I'm in, and we're all being brought along like sheep. I don't know, but I know that almost all the things I believed, I now think the opposite. And I'm honest enough to say to myself, like, that's how it is, and I don't know if I'm in the right or wrong, but it's definitely a situation where I used to think A was right, but now I think B.
Well, maybe that's because of social media. Never
Absolutely.
knew.
And also because if you just look at Facebook, because I'm friends with you and these other people who think a certain way, they probably feed things to me that you have read. So we all start getting this groupthink.
Yeah.
Which is why whenever the people voted for Brexit, the people who were voting against Brexit, they were sure they were going to win, because all their friends and all their bubble is thinking the same way. And the people who were voting for Brexit were sure they were going to win, because all their friends and all their bubble were sure they were going to win. So whenever Brexit happened, the people were horrified. They couldn't believe it. And it was the same with
Yeah.
Trump. The people who voted for Hillary they thought were guaranteed to win. It's already in the bag, because everyone like them had been clicking on the same articles and reading the same things, and they were disseminating the same information and buying into their own, sort of feeding each other, you know?
Mm. Do you think that with social distancing, people have started craving real, genuine connection over social media?
I think it's hard for me to know. And the reason why is because we're in Sweden, and because I haven't really been too strict upon it, actually.
Mm.
So my approach has been that I respect people who are fearful of this virus, and I also want to give them their space. But if someone wants to come and sit beside me and have a cup of tea, fair enough. I'm not going to be all over them in any way, but I've really tried to keep my life as normal as possible.
Yeah, that's the blessing about Sweden. There's a total feeling of normality.
And it's a choice as well. I mean, you can be as strict as you want. And I have to say, I was in town today. I've just come back from work, and today was busy. Actually, it was like a normal summer's day. And I was in about 2 weeks ago again, and I noticed there was another uptick. So it seems that incrementally we're jumping in more and more people going back to the normal. But because I work in the city, I've had to I've had to be in the office 2 days per week every week. So I've seen Stockholm go from normal buzz to like literally nothing. And it was like that for maybe 6 weeks, and then you could see it sort of creep back, sort of week, one or two people extra in the tunnelbana. But today
Yeah,
was almost like a normal day, like before lockdown.
I think the tunnelbana is is a risk point for a lot of people just because there aren't really very many masks. I don't see anyone wearing masks in Stockholm really, just maybe the elderly. Um, and so that is a risk. I think, honestly, I have for the last, God, maybe 5 months, I've only been on the Tunnelbana maybe 3 times, and I have cycled everywhere. I've done 40-kilometer cycles sometimes to get from A to B.
Wow.
Um, so it's been a blessing because, okay, you're a little sweaty when you turn up, but you're social distancing anyway, so no one will notice. Um, and also, my legs have never been so strong. I mean, I can scale hills now that I never thought I could. And I think a lot more people are cycling. It's becoming more like Copenhagen. I see Stockholm is just full of bicycles, even more than before, because people that would usually commute are just sucking it up and cycling that extra bit to get to their office.
Absolutely, that's definitely for sure. I have been cycle. I always cycle actually during the winter. I'm always on the tunnelbana, but during the summer months, I'm
Yeah.
always on the bike anyway. And I think it's a blessing that we have a city where we have both. But for sure, I was on the tunnelbana today and I noticed it. But that's why I says it. The last few weeks I've been cycling to work, so I haven't seen it as much.
What a luxury.
What a
That's one
city!
thing I realized is what a luxury that we can cycle.
Can you tell me this? You've lived in London. You've lived around.
Chicago.
You've
Yeah.
lived around. So can you tell me how
Chicago.
Stockholm is for you?
Well, I never felt like I was oppressed as a woman. And that's the first time in any city that I felt being a woman doesn't make any difference. I've never been catcalled. I've been here 6 years and nobody has ever wolf whistled at me or catcalled at me, even if it's late at night and I'm dressed up to the nines. I've never been catcalled. And every other town or city I've been to, someone has catcalled me when I'm dressed up.
Yeah,
And that's just huge. The amount of respect that they have for women here, and um, you really feel the equality,
that's
and just
great.
yeah, like you're an ally to men rather than um, the other.
And how does London feel in comparison then?
Oh gosh, it's a very scary place to be as a woman, especially if you're commuting.
London,
The
yeah.
oh yeah, especially if you're alone, but even with friends, you can be sexually harassed on the underground. Every
Seriously.
friend I know has been sexually harassed. Not just some, all. Every single girlfriend that I know in London has been sexually harassed on the underground
And what's the difference in the societies? Why is that? Why is that happening in London so much?
because no one told them not to. And I heard that in play schools, apparently in Sweden, as a very young child, they teach the girls and boys about personal space and saying no. And they just don't teach that in other countries.
No, not at all.
And so there's a lack of awareness of personal space, and that can be very detrimental, I think, for women's mental health. I mean, there's some women that they were just petrified getting on the train every day, and they would wear, including myself sometimes, a big black hoodie with the hood up, just to try not to get noticed by men.
That
Especially if you're on an empty carriage and there's just a group of men and it's just you and them on an empty carriage, you're petrified. You put your hood right up.
do you actually?
Oh yeah. And I've seen women being harassed and other women trying to step in and help. I felt so guilty one night. A, I had a dinner in a restaurant and I invited my friends out and the dinner went on a bit late and they were all getting the train home. And two of them got sexually harassed on the way home, and I was just so guilty. Um, one guy followed her home and she had to run, and then the other girl, he hovered his hand over her leg for a long time, sat beside her, and then she got up and walked to a different seat. He got up and walked and sat beside her again and put his hand on her leg, so she
Like
had to
literally like
scream.
that?
Oh yeah,
That is nuts. Do you know what the question I have in these situations is who is their mother? You know, like
yeah,
I grew, maybe I'm lucky that I grew up with a mother who's taught me the difference between basic right and wrong and just human decency and good manners. But you don't do that. You
yeah,
don't do that. You just, I mean, that's for as a lad who grew up as a single lad working in Dublin. I can't imagine me even doing the first one of them. Never mind following the girl and repeating it again.
Yeah, well, I mean, you hear the phrase, the famous phrase, hurt people hurt people.
Yeah, of course.
And I think there's a lot of very sad people living in these big cities blending in because they have the anonymity to do what they like to act out.
Yeah, that's true.
You get it in any big city except for Stockholm. I don't know what's so special, but I just feel so safe here.
Yeah, but I think I do as well. I've had one, I think, issue since I moved here, where there was a young guy who had just moved here recently as a refugee, and he was in the T Centralen, the central station, and he was running with his 2 feet and trying to keep himself, like dive himself through the vending machine for the chocolate and stuff.
Oh,
And I says, mate, like it's 3 a.m. The place is full of people, and please stop. Like, don't do that to yourself because you're making yourself look like an absolute fool. And he was up in my face so heavy, man. And I was like, man, calm down. But apart from that one thing that happened to me in Stockholm, I've never even seen trouble. I've never seen people raise their voice. I've never seen any nonsense. And I think the police here are very fair. They have a sort of subtle sort of background. They sort of hover around in the background and keep an eye on things. And I had a bike stolen actually from out in front of my apartment at the end of the summer last year. But apart from that, I've had no problems.
that's an amazing story, actually. That you had your bike robbed, and then didn't you get
2
given a bike?
bikes.
Wow.
So what
By
happened
the
is
policeman.
I came back one day. I was actually going down to get my bike. I was coming back from work and I realized there was a gap where my bike usually is, and I looked and my chain had been snipped.
Oh.
And my approach to that was, God bless them, whoever they are. I hope they needed the bike more than I do. That was the exact words I said, and I was like, okay, let it at that. God bless them. So started this. So the winter went, and I wouldn't have been on a bike anyway. But just at the end of the winter, we were driving to the groceries. We were going to get a lot of food in one of the bigger stores, and there was a trailer in front of us full of bikes, and I thought that they were going to a bike sale because we had one in our apartment block at the last place I lived. So when we got to the red light, I beeped them, pulled up beside them, and asked them, could you tell us where the sale is for the bikes? Because I'm interested in buying one. And he says, we're not selling them. We're going to dump them in the recycling. So he goes, if you want one, you can have one. And I was like, thank you, God. I was so delighted. So I ended up picking up a great bike. And the one I wanted had a lock on it. They'd lost the key for it. And that was the only thing that was wrong with it. And he goes, you know what? This red one's great, but sure, you've got the car. Put the black one in the back too. And just, this is how you cut it. We just never got around to it, so we were going to put it to the recycling. So I ended up taking 2 bikes. One of them had a flat tire, and one of them had a chain on it. And I literally snipped the chain at a store, and I got a new tube for the other bike, and I ended up with 2 really good bikes. So that's why I've been cycling just during these summer months.
The universe will provide.
It will surely provide, Elaina. And on that, I think, thank you for
Yeah.
providing to us and coming in and sharing sharing the great person you are. It's really an honor to call you a friend, and I really see you as a really inspirational woman for not just for younger women, but also just people generally. You're such a good human being, and I really appreciate you, and I appreciate how you conduct yourself. And this is despite the fact that you're dealing with one of the worst sort of sicknesses possible when it comes to daily life.
Thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you, Elaina. And if people want to get in touch with you or whatever, you can probably provide your social media, and I'll put them in the comment section here so people can reach out if they have any questions about epilepsy or anything like that. And just thanks for being you.
Yeah, I mean, I will just say I have an Instagram that I talk about epilepsy quite a bit, and I have a lot of followers who also have epilepsy. So if you want to join me, go through my followers list. There's a lot of really inspirational people battling with brain disorders, just like me.
And what's your handle? What's your Instagram handle?
Elaina_O'Shea.
And I'll put it in the comments here as well. All right then. Thanks, Elaina.
Take care.
You're a star. Thank you so much. See ya. Bye.